the level of expectation is so high. You know, we still joke with my mum because I was shortlisting what universities I wanted to go to, and I named a great Russell Group university, but in her mind that wasn't good enough. And she said, "Oh, you'll go there over my dead body."
Hi, and welcome to A Class of Their Own podcast, revealing the human stories behind their name. We will hear honest and intimate reflections from our guests who, despite their circumstances, shape a world that reflects their unique visions of success. Join me, Mira Magecha, to learn from these inspirational people and take the first step to make your own change. On today's episode, we're joined by Grace Osborne. Hi, Grace. How are you?
I am good, thank you.
We met on LinkedIn when I first started the podcast, and we talked about whether or not it was right for you to come onto the podcast and share your story. And we both decided it was, because your story is slightly different, which is you don't necessarily come from the humble beginning,
No.
but you work in the space. So I'm really interested in hearing about what motivates you in this space, and just learn more about you.
Yeah, awesome.
Great. So let's get started. Who's Grace?
So Grace comes from, as you mentioned, really privileged background. So I grew up in Surrey, home counties. I mean, now I work in the space, I think a lot about the privileges I hold, and you almost kind of set your background based on that.
Yeah.
You know, 2-parent household. My dad worked in hedge funds, so really, you know, a lot of money in that space. I academically went to a private school, really, really top performing all girls private school. And the family in which I came from had a history of going to university. So I'm 5th generation university student, and 4 of those generations are women, which is, I think, probably quite rare.
Yeah, pretty unheard of.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm really proud of that. Like, despite working in this space, sometimes you can get into the space of feeling shame about your background, and I don't feel any shame about my background. I'm so proud of those women who face those barriers to allow me to not have to face them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I grew up in a really, really privileged way. And now I would say I was really ignorant about the rest of society. I just lived in this bubble.
Yeah.
And everyone I knew went to university, all my friends went to university. And it wasn't until I started to think about what I was going to do as a career that it even occurred to me that people didn't have a life like mine.
Okay, so before we get into your backstory of why you do what you do, etc., I just want to focus in on who is Grace.
Yeah.
So let's take it to you're meeting someone for the first time in a social setting. How would you naturally introduce yourself?
I'd always talk about my job. So I'd always say, I'm Grace, I work in social mobility, that's my passion. That it feels like a big part of my personality and who I identify myself with. My partner always laughs because he's like, how many seconds before Grace brings up her job? Because it's just like, it's my fibre of my being that I just love what I do.
Yeah.
Outside of that, I'm someone who, I don't know, lives quite a normal life, I think. We're getting married later this year. We've got 2 dogs that we've just adopted. But yeah, not. I don't talk much about anything except for what I do.
Okay.
Yeah, which
we'll come back to. It'll be an interesting circular journey that we're on in this conversation.
Yeah.
So tell me a bit about growing up. That's not the focus of this particular conversation for you, but I'd love to just hear a bit about where you grew up, how you grew up, and what led you into the social mobility space.
Yeah, so grew up in Surrey, Guildford, went to school there, went to private school my entire schooling, highly academic environment.
Yeah.
So it was really competitive. And that probably feeds into who I am now. Yeah, it was, you sort of didn't realize quite how competitive it was, or how much that kind of was ingrained in you, that you had to be the best, you had to do the best. Nice family, like happy upbringing.
Siblings?
Yeah, I've got a brother. We did a lot of traveling when I was younger, a lot. I think my mum was always really proud. She'd say things like, oh, you know, you must be the most well-travelled 11-year-old that I know. So yeah, we did a lot of long holidays, which, yeah, probably is the thing I think about most when I think about growing up, is going abroad.
How has how you grew up impacted who you are today?
That's a good question, because I think I've spent a lot of the last 10 years reflecting on everything I had
Yeah.
that other people don't get. So I don't necessarily know. I know my mum would say that we grew up in quite a religious household, so we're Catholic. And she'd say, oh, it's the morals of being Catholic that have shaped who you are. Like that would be her answer. If I couldn't give you the answer as to like what pushed me into what I do now, or what kind of part of my upbringing got me there. So maybe she's right. I would kind of distance myself from that nowadays. But yeah, maybe she is right, that actually that like really heavy focus on morals kind of really made me feel like I can't sit still and watch certain things go the way they are.
And what is it that you do? So let's tell people what you do, because work is clearly really important to you, and then we'll go a little bit backwards to come forward.
Of course. So my title would be social mobility manager or social mobility lead. So my job is focused purely on looking at how my business supports social mobility, whether that is in the outreach space. So before people have even, young people, doesn't have to be young people, have even considered their career or what job they want, how do we help them get those aspirations? But then also once they get into the workplace, how do they thrive and succeed? And then the kind of final part is, we know that we're very forefront in the space. How do we encourage all other businesses to do what we do? Because we know that not many yet are at the level of recognising class in the way that we are.
And why class versus any of the other or non-protected characteristics? So I was going to say the other protected characteristics, but class isn't currently a protected characteristics. Yeah. And by protected characteristics, I know you know exactly what I mean. Yeah. But we're talking about sex, religion, race, ethnicity, etc.
Yeah.
Disability, etc. Why social mobility? Why class?
For me?
For you?
For me. That is definitely down to my experience leaving university and becoming a teacher.
Okay.
Potentially it's also my experience of growing up in a household that was middle class, and the juxtaposition of those two things, and acknowledging and seeing what the massive gaps were, and recognising like that's just not fair or acceptable in this society.
Okay, so take me back to being a school teacher when you left university.
So,
in fact, take me back before we get to that point. Yeah. Take me to university and what you thought you would be doing when you left uni.
Yeah. So I was at a very, I was at Durham. It's very, most people there are middle class. Not all, but most. And it's very much in a bubble. And I thought I was going to go and join a bank at some point. I had lots of experience with working with children, and heard about the scheme that essentially pitched to me was go and become a teacher and then you'll get a job in a bank afterwards. And I thought, perfect. I can get in using the experience I've already got, but then I'll get a free ticket into the corporate world that I want to go into. So yeah, I was obsessed with the idea of going into corporate.
Why?
Just because everyone was like, that was my what sphere of experience was that competitive all girls school. Everyone ends up in banking or consulting. That's where the prestigious roles are. There was very much a hierarchy of what are the good jobs.
Yeah.
And I wanted a good job.
And I'm assuming you also had access to all of the best graduate programs because of your background and your educational status. And again, I'm going to assume you were doing really well at university as well.
Yeah. So had great grades, A-levels and university grades. And I think one of the defining things that I now see of my schooling was the confidence. I never at any point ever questioned that I couldn't do whatever I wanted.
Okay.
Like I now talk to people and say, oh, well, I just thought I'd either become a lawyer or a doctor. And they go, well, you couldn't do both. And it never occurred to me that you couldn't do both. Like that it was never even a thought process that I couldn't just pick whatever I wanted to do and that it would be in the palm of my hand.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible because I've been doing a lot of these interviews now and I've not heard a single guest say that. And obviously that's because I'm talking to a different demographic.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating to hear the story as well.
Yeah.
You now left university and you've gone to do a teaching PGC, I'm assuming?
It was through Teach First.
Okay.
So working particularly in contexts where it's deprived areas.
Okay.
And it was like culture shock.
What drew you to
No
that though? So what was it that someone came and talked to you about, given that your trajectory was going to be going into banking?
It was purely this idea that they're not so much now, but back then it was you go and teach for 2 years and then all the best jobs want you. Okay. They want to hire Teach First teachers. So that for me was like, perfect, excellent. I'll go and do, a jolly in a school for 2 years and I remember saying on the kind of training program, first 6 weeks, I kept saying, you'll see me at Goldman Sachs in 2 years. Like I just kept saying it because that's just what I thought was
going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay. So you then go and do your teaching practice and what happens?
So I go into a school that was in the West Midlands, and for context, I guess to kind of juxtapose my own experience, I'd gone to a school where it was something like 98% of all GCSEs sat were A's or A stars. So maybe 1 or 2 girls in my year would get a B in one subject. The school I was teaching in was exactly the opposite. About 2% of the GCSEs sat got A's and A stars. So I think it was only about a quarter of all students even got 5 good GCSEs. So that in itself was a massive culture shock, is I was just like, oh, people like don't do academically well here. But everything about it was totally different to the experience I'd had growing up. High levels of poverty for the majority of students, total lack of engagement with school, like absolutely across the board. And I think initially you see that and you think that that's an issue with the students, and it doesn't take you very long to realise that actually like there is nothing about them that is why they don't engage with education.
Yeah.
Like my year 11 pupils who I taught in my first year, I was the first permanent teacher they'd had in science, their entire secondary education. So they'd had cover teachers for 4 years. So when I came in, they just kept saying, "Are you going to be back next week, miss?" Like, yeah, I'm going to be here every week. But to them, the experience was science teachers just don't stay. So why would this person stay? Because none of the others have.
Yeah. What was it that you learnt about yourself in that first year?
I mean, I learned I was incredibly resilient. It was a really, really tough environment to teach in. Really tough, because whilst nothing about it was the pupil's fault, that didn't make them easy to teach.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they just didn't care. And you kind of looked at the situation and thought, fair enough. Like, no one is telling them why they should care. No one is giving them any kind of tangible outcome at the end. And I absolutely learned that this was not an environment which I wanted to continue to ignore once I left teaching. That year or 2 years absolutely shaped my future career, because I just was like, I can't walk away from this and go, oh, that was nice. You know, at least I did my bit by I'm going to go and work in a bank and earn tons of money. It just wasn't, that was it. I couldn't walk away from that.
What was it that you were going to try and change and adapt and help and support and enable? What was that drive? What was it that you were hoping to do?
When I left teaching, I didn't know. I just knew I couldn't leave and pretend it didn't happen.
And it didn't exist.
Yeah. And I didn't necessarily always think I'm just going to leave teaching. There were moments where I thought, maybe I'll stay in teaching. But it was such a hard environment, so difficult. And I thought, I'm not going to be doing the impact that I want to have in this workplace anymore, because I'm exhausted, I'm burnt out. So I was like, I want to keep having impact, but I don't think it's in this environment anymore.
What were people around you saying? Because obviously there was this expectation, both from yourself when you started, that you were going to be here for 2 years, tick box exercise and move on and get on with the rest of your life. What happened around you? What were the conversations that you were having?
I think back then and to this day, my family less so, but perhaps my friends and my family friends all just thought I'm not sure if they thought I was crazy, but I think they didn't, to this day, they don't really understand. So they just thought like, oh, you know, it's a nice thing that you're doing, but it's not really needed, is it? You know? And I did have some fiery arguments with family friends, particularly about the reality of society. You know, you would just pick up on people saying, oh, well, people don't do that well in their GCSEs because they don't work very hard. And that would make me angry.
That was a trigger.
Yeah, absolutely. Still would be to this day. And would say, hang on. Like, no, that's not how this works. That might be your experience. You know, if someone in my school hadn't got great GCSEs, then yeah, you might say, oh, perhaps they've been a bit lazy. They've had every resource available to them. But I was like, no, we can't be in this situation where people just assume if you don't have great grades that you're lazy
or thick.
Yeah.
And what was the reality of the situation? So what was your counter argument of going, no, that's not the case?
I mean, I could talk about 400 different students and the 400 different reasons why they weren't going to achieve top grades. You know, think of one student in my class who'd fall asleep almost every lesson because home did not have food available to feed her in the evening. She was the oldest of 5 siblings and she'd sacrificed food for her siblings. You know, that child is never going to perform well in a GCSE exam because she just doesn't physically have the energy to sit and do that exam, you know, or in a school where pupils were running around the school wild, rioting at points in the school because actually the teachers weren't engaged because the pupils weren't behaving in the way that they expected them to, and that sort of environment where there's no structure and no level of kind of, right, how do we get you from a D to an A? It's not an environment that's set up for academic success.
Yeah.
But I think the argument back would sort of always be, well, why don't they just move schools? And what was interesting is that the pupils in my school, a very large group of them had been to 3 or 4 different schools, because every single school in that catchment area was exactly the same. And the parents genuinely wanted their kids to get the best education, but they were just stuck in this catch-22 of, well, I can keep moving my child, but there's not going to be an environment that's going to help them.
And was there a particular demographic in terms of the school, the pupils at the school?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was white working class in an area of the Black Country. I think it was something like 95% white working class. I think, how many students were on free school meals? Somewhere between 40 and 60% free school meals. So pretty high, because the national average now is about 20%.
Yeah. So you leave school, you leave
Teaching. Yeah.
And what happens next?
So I went to go and work for Teach First as a charity for about 4.5 years, working across their recruitment, so recruiting teachers initially, and then working in their school partnerships, so how we support their schools to get those teachers and to make a difference for those schools.
And then how do you get to where you are today?
So I saw my previous company, BWC, had an opening for a social mobility and schools engagement role. And I'd very much been on the school engagement side. I'd been working with schools, trying to support them with their teachers. So I approached it from that perspective. And to be honest, hadn't used the phrase social mobility at all before this. I talk about like educational inequality, but I wouldn't talk about social mobility. That wasn't part of my language. So I applied for this role and got it, and was very much working in the outreach space. So like, how do we get young people in to visit the office? But what really engaged me was the bit after that, once they come in, was actually, hang on, these workplaces aren't set up for people who come from a low-income environment. That actually, a lot of our data showed that people were getting hired and then leaving because it just wasn't built for them. It wasn't an environment that was set up. It was set up for the majority, which was middle class, usually white males, who would kind of set that culture.
And did you ever question why the organisation had created this particular role, and what outcome and impact they really wanted to have?
I remember when I applied asking, like, why would you care about this?
Yeah.
Because I'd worked in the charity space and that made sense. Like, and I think it was sort of twofold. Partly it's just a good thing to do. And partly they had started to see the data that told them that they weren't hiring proportional representation across class, but also that in the areas where they were, the performance was really, really good. And actually that told them that they were missing out on talent. If they weren't going to be hiring and then retaining these individuals, they were just going to lose talent. And that wasn't great for business, honestly.
Yeah. So you come in, and what is your role? What is it that you did during that phase?
So mainly I was organising school outreach, getting students in. So we got about, 10,000 students into the offices every year. So, creating programs where they could actually see themselves as becoming, a consultant or an accountant. And then the kind of other side was doing more of the advocacy and talking about class in the workplace, and actually like what are we as a business doing? What are other businesses doing? And one actually big factor in all of that was the Social Mobility Employer Index, which ranks all the employers every year. And I was writing our submission to that, and it basically gives you like a best practice sheet of how do you do this well. And so I got really involved in that and really excited by, oh my gosh, these are all the things we could be doing to make our environment a really welcoming space. So yeah, then sort of proposing policies and looking through our current policies and being like, well, actually that doesn't suit everyone. How can we ensure that allows for anyone, regardless of class, to be involved?
This episode is brought to you by Play for Change. Play for Change brings together leadership coaching, expert facilitation, and builds communities. They help craft real connections, spark learning, and turn play into powerful experiments to enable better relationships with yourself and others around you. To find out more, go to playforchange.co.uk. Links are in the show notes below. What change and impact do you think you made during that time?
I mean, I got us to number 1 in the index, so I was pretty happy about that. But I think it was mainly the internal side. So we already had like a really good outreach arm that was doing really, really good work. And, I supported with that and contributed to it, absolutely. But my real zeal was for that internal stuff. So yeah, just looking at like what we could do, what policies we could change, and identifying things that just didn't seem fair at all, and how we could influence them. So one policy that we got signed off just before I moved companies was around exams. So a lot of the students were deferring their exams because of stress and anxiety was the given reason. But when you are sitting those exams, if you don't pass them, you are given your notice at that point. Now, if you come from a privileged background and you know that your family will say, that's fine, just come home, you'll work out your next steps, it will be all right, then that's fine. If you're someone from a low income background who needs that paycheck, then you're going to defer your exams because you're thinking, well, I've got 3 more months, like 3 more months of a paycheck. Okay, then maybe I'll fail my exams and then, we'll deal with it then. But if I could just get 3 more months on my paycheck, then that will be all right. And so it was sort of digging under, okay, if people are saying this is why they're not going to sit those exams, is there something about the data that tells us that actually there may be something else going on here? And we could see that from a socioeconomic background, there were much more people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds.
And this was, I'm assuming, the accountancy exams.
Yeah.
As they come into a grad program or a program, and they were deferring those.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. When you think about internal impact at that organisation, what was the feedback you got on the work that you did from the people on the ground? Good. I think the individuals you're thinking about, like those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, didn't always know necessarily that that's why those policies would change. I've always approached whatever I do with the perspective of don't change the individual, change the system. And so it's forward thinking of how do we change the system so that individual never needs to know that we've done it just for them. Yeah.
Because that's what belonging is, right? That person feels like they belong, regardless of what policies are in place. We did get good feedback on policy changes, but for the majority, I'd say they'd just never know that was to cater for them.
Yeah. You talked about joining a very prestigious consultancy business.
Yeah.
After joining a charity. Was there a moment when you took on that role, even if you were working in the social mobility space still and making impact and wanting to have impact, but did you get more accepted, if that's the right term, into the friendships, the families, family, friends, etc., because it was such a prestigious organisation and almost acceptable of your background to be back in somewhere like that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 100%. I think for the first 3 months, I remember getting really annoyed about that because I was like, I'm no different as a person. I was doing just as good work working in a charity than I was in this massive corporate environment. But suddenly everyone would go, oh, you work there. Oh, well, that's, and I remember my mum is friends with lots of the parents of children I was at school with, the adults now, not children, but, and saying, oh, well, so-and-so, so impressed with what you're doing. Because there's still that competitiveness.
Yeah.
And yeah, people, and it was happening both in my personal life and in my professional life as well. So ex-colleagues would suddenly regard me as of some importance where they might not before. So I remember there was a situation where I went to an event with the charity that I'd worked for, and suddenly all these executive directors were like, how are you doing there? Are you doing really, really well? Oh, we miss you here at this charity. I remember thinking, no, you don't. You didn't know my name
a few months ago.
Yeah. But now suddenly, because I work for this big corporate organisation, that makes me somebody, and it doesn't. It is relevant who I am. I mean, on the flip side, I think back and think, well, I have more of a voice now. People look at my CV and go, oh, well, or we'll listen to that person because that organisation did. Therefore, they must have something important to say. So in some ways, I can't get too annoyed by it because it has genuinely supported my career and given me credentials, essentially, given me that kind of tick box to say, oh, that company advocates for her, so therefore she must
know what she's
talking about. Yeah.
From an individual point of view, though, what is it about you that just couldn't let go of that child when you first went into teaching and went, this is too important to not continue my work? And it's not to say you'll continue forevermore, etc., but I know you're still in the social mobility space. But what was it? What is it that you have that, for example, other teachers that started in your intake could easily go back and go into banking or consulting or whatever their field of work was? What makes you different?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if it's compassion and just genuinely not being able to do anything other than this. Yeah, I guess probably it is compassion. I don't know why I find it difficult to kind of say, yeah, it's just, that's what it is. But I just find it all consuming.
Is there an element of guilt associated with why you do the work that you do?
It's a really good question. And I think about that all the time. I'd like to think not. I think probably it's less guilt and more appreciation. Just that acknowledgement that I didn't have to face any of these barriers because of where I grew up and who I was born to and what geography I was born in. And it's almost saying, I didn't have to go through that, so therefore I should be the one who puts my time and effort and energy into ensuring others don't have to. There probably is guilt, but I really, really work hard not to feel it and not to acknowledge that, because I don't think it helps anyone. I think, especially now with lots of culture wars going on, the conversation does sometimes really veer into, we should abolish private schools, we should get rid of this, we should remove that. And I don't like getting into that conversation because I don't think it helps anyone. Having said that, I acknowledge that I was a very ignorant individual from the ages of, I don't know, probably 11 to 18, and probably said a lot of things that I would never say now. So maybe there is that element of recompensing for that person that didn't realise that what I was saying is not acceptable.
And if you could kind of go back and give your younger self, so those years between 11 and 18, some advice or guidance, or if you could change the way we educate, or the separation, I suppose, to some extent, of the folks with cash and the folks without money, is there anything that you would do differently, or advice you would give yourself?
You know, I actually went back to speak to my school about 3 months ago.
Okay.
So talking to a room full of me's.
Yeah.
And I really, there was a moment where I thought, don't do that, because I don't like the idea of helping out young people who have more opportunities than you could count on 10 people's hands. But the reason I did it was I was like, I want to give them some awareness of what the reality of life is like for people who are not like them. And I think my advice to them was, go and do frontline work, like go into environments that are not like the environment you grew up in. Because I have lots of friends now who I grew up with who are doctors and lawyers, high prestigious roles, but you are serving communities that you don't know or understand. And they still don't know or understand them, and they still hold a lot of biases and a lot of, so I'd probably say, like, just go and do some volunteering, like go and
genuinely get out of your comfort zone and go to learn about what it's like. Yeah.
Like the pivotal moment for me was when I was on some work experience in a school, and a girl said to me, oh my goodness, this was when I was at university, oh my goodness, my cousin's best friend is at university. And it was like one of those moments where like time stops. And I was like, her cousin's best friend. And I'm thinking, oh my God, everyone I know ever has been to university. That isn't, like, how could that be the closest person that she knows? And that for me was that moment that went, oh my God, this, like, that's the reality for lots of people. And I just, that was a really, really defining moment.
When you look back to when you were a child, what was your key driver?
Gosh, competition, impressing my family, kind of meeting the expectations of my family, which were really high. And in the best way possible, they wanted us to be really, really, really successful, which obviously that's what all parents want for their children. But I think the level of expectation is so high. We still joke with my mum because I was shortlisting what universities I wanted to go to, and I named a great Russell Group university, but in her mind that wasn't good enough. And she said, "Oh, you'll go there over my dead body." And,
wow.
And like that's the level of expectation, that it wasn't, oh, going to Russell Group University is good. No, you have to go to the top tier universities, because otherwise you're not meeting
The expectation
that's set out for you.
And you've defied the expectations that were set out for you in terms of you didn't go into banking, you didn't go into consulting, you didn't become a doctor or a lawyer, etc. How does that compare to where you are today and the acceptance that you have from your family today? Because again, I'm going to make another assumption, is you don't earn the same amount of money that you could have had you gone and done the banking career, for example.
I'd say I probably do just about, now that I'm in corporate and I work in a corporate environment. But I didn't until that happened.
Yeah.
And that, again, there is a really open conversation about money in my family, and they want to know how much I'm earning, and which perhaps, I don't know if that happens in other families, but they want to know. So yeah, for a really long time, I definitely didn't earn the same level. And I remember, like, my parents and their friends have conversations about how much their children earn. Like, that's a really acceptable conversation. And so now probably there's an element to which they can breathe a sigh of relief, in that they know that conversation, they can say, oh, well, Grace is on XYZ at this firm. So I'd say there is still an element to which they don't understand. I mean, even when I was on holiday last summer, we'd seen some family friends, and someone said, oh, what does Grace do? And my mum said, oh, she just does window dressing. Because that's her perception of my job, it's just trying to make a company look good. It's not about improving equality or actually trying to make a difference. It's just trying to make a company look good. So there's still that perception. I don't know if she believes that, but that's how she'll explain it to her friends, because that's the easiest point of reference.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I think coming from that background has helped a lot, because in lots of these businesses, that is exactly the mindset that people at the top have. So coming from that environment where conversations like that happen means that when you walk into that boardroom and they're thinking, well, this is just window dressing for us, you kind of know the levers to say, actually, no, like, look at the data, or, here's a story of someone for whom it's actually made a massive difference. Or did you know this senior leader in your business is more than happy to talk about their background? Look at how successful they are and how much they've had to overcome to be the successful person.
And in some ways, because you belong in that boardroom, because of the background, you understand the language, you understand what the little triggers are to kind of go, I can connect with you on that level, and therefore I can talk to you about something that actually is really impactful.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's a huge piece around cultural fit. And it's interesting because I now have to talk about that a lot and say, we've got to really challenge it. But I recognise I wouldn't be where I am today if I wasn't somewhat accepted into the corporate environments I work in, because I can speak the language. When they talk about what operas they like going to, I know what they're talking about. So there's that sort of slightly two-sided world where I'm fighting against it, but also using it to my advantage to get on.
Yeah. And what's really fascinating is most people I speak to, because I come from a former people world, people I find who are in this space are usually doing it on the side of their desk. They are creating ESG groups, as an example, to lift the employee voice in a particular space, which could be class, it could be working class, it could be whatever. And I haven't seen within the organisations I've previously worked with where it's someone who comes from a completely different background who becomes a genuine and true ally towards it. So it's incredible. It's great to have you on here and share the passion that you clearly have for something that you've had to go through and learn and navigate to help enable and support others who you don't necessarily have the same cultural references as.
Yeah.
We started this conversation with who is Grace, and I'd like to go full circle back to who is Grace. Is there anything that you would add, change, adapt to how you started?
I'd volunteer more at the beginning. That when I say it's all consuming, my social life is my volunteering. Like it sounds so, I don't know, trite, but like I'm a school governor, I'm a trustee of a charity, I mentor, a coach. I just use whatever time I have to continue to work in the space and continue to learn. And I wish I'd done it sooner because I feel like I know so much more, so much quicker from having continued to do that. And yeah, I just wish I'd used time that I'd had to be more involved.
Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
It's been a real pleasure getting to know you and understanding why you do what you do.
Thanks so much.
If you enjoyed that conversation, please share A Class of Their Own podcast with your friends and family. Subscribe, follow and like. It really helps us continue to grow. Keep being you through connection, learning and play. You are a class of your own.